So the film subgenre of Giallo is pretty interesting because it's defined by a lot of common factors for which there are a lot of exceptions to. For instance, Giallos feature black-gloved killers, but not always. They feature amateur detectives who are not professional police officers, but not always. They feature a killer who has a psychosexual motive, but not always. Giallos have no supernatural elements, but not always. Giallos have a lot of sexual content, but not no, pretty much always on that one. So the point here is Giallo is very hard to define, and because of that, you've got certain movies that a lot of people argue about, is it or isn't it a Giallo, because it has some elements and not others. But today I want to talk to you about a representative film that is exactly what a Giallo film commonly is and what it does best. And that is The Case of the Bloody Iris from 1972. What is going on, my friends? Welcome again to the Cobwebs channel. My name is Daniel. And yeah, I just watched The Case of the Bloody Iris on this brand new 4K release from a brand new boutique label called Celluloid Dreams. This is actually their first ever release. And they were actually nice enough to send this to me for review. So thank you so much to Celluloid Dreams. And I was really excited to get this because I'd actually seen this movie before. Years ago, I went on a huge binge of just watching a ton of Giallo films. I got obsessed with the genre, just got really deep into it. And I remember The Case of the Bloody Iris was actually one of my favorites. And I felt like it was underrated because I just never heard people talk about this one. But I think it's because it wasn't really available on physical media. So I'm so glad this is brand new to 4K and hopefully more people can see this movie that I think is pretty darn good. But what is this movie about? Okay, so it stars Edwige Fenech as a young model living in the city, and her ex-husband, who is the leader of a sex cult, is trying to pull her back in, all while she's falling in love with another man who runs the apartment complex that she stays in, and there are a bunch of brutal murders that are going on, all targeted at beautiful young women, most of which other models that work for her modeling agency. So who is doing these killings? Well, that's what our characters have got to find out. So what do I like about this movie? Well, first of all, it looks fantastic on this brand new 4K. It looks exactly as good as I would hope for it to look. And it's a very interesting slipcover it's got because it's got the exact same image on the front and back. I've never seen that before, except here it's got the Italian title. And I can't read you exactly what the Italian title is, but I got the translation pulled up here. It's translated to "Why Those Strange Drops of Blood on Jennifer's Body." Yeah, but that's kind of a cool thing. And you pull the slipcover off right here and you've got really, really cool original poster art right there featuring one of the most striking of images that you're going to find in the actual movie. But yeah, the movie has a fantastic cast, starring Edwige Fenech, who, if you're not familiar with Giallo films, you might not know her. But if you are familiar with Giallo, you know she's probably the queen of this genre. She's in so many of these movies, always awesome, like in The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, Your Vice is a Locked Room and Only I Have the Key. A lot of movies about vices. And probably my personal favorite, All the Colors of the Dark, which is an awesome, awesome movie starring her. But it's also got George Hilton, who's also in a lot of these movies. He's like maybe the king of the Giallo. No, the king of the Giallo is Dario Argento, but you know what I mean, as far as guys in front of the camera. He also stars with Edwige Fenech in The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward. He's also in one of my favorite other movies that I call a representative pick of exactly what Giallo is, which is The Case of the Scorpion's Tail. Love that movie. And the movie is directed by Giuliano Carmimino. I hope I'm pronouncing these names right, who I'm not very familiar with. Apparently he did a lot of Italian Westerns. A lot of people call them spaghetti Westerns. I haven't seen any of them, but it's written by Ernesto Gastaldi, who's done a ton of fantastic movies like The Horrible Dr. Hitchcock, The Whip and the Body, Torso, and once again, All the Colors of the Dark. So he's proven himself to me, written a lot of movies I really like, and this is definitely another one. And I think the screenplay is really good here because this is a Giallo that's never boring. A lot of times when I'm judging Giallo, I feel like it's either boring or it's good. And as long as it's not boring, I generally like it because I just like the vibe of Giallo films. And this one is never boring. It's actually, and there are Giallos that are definitely really slow. I admit that, even though I'm a big fan of this subgenre. This one isn't. It's got a pretty tight plot. It's got kill sequences and just stock intense sequences peppered pretty evenly throughout to keep the pacing going. And I think maybe where it shines the most is just really entertaining side characters. This is a Giallo with a pretty light tone. This isn't one of the darker, more intense movies like All the Colors of the Dark. I just keep mentioning that movie. I just love that film. This one, it feels light. It feels fun. It's actually got a lot of comedy. It's got a lot of comedy relief characters. Like, I really like the police detectives who are investigating these murders. One of them's like this tough, hard-ass guy, and the other one's like his weak subordinate who he's always bossing him around, and he's kind of upset. They're both obsessed with a stamp collection, which is like a little quirk. Just a lot of quirky characters in this thing. And to talk about Edwige Fenech, she's great in this. She's great in all the old Italian movies that she's in. She's just this like impossibly gorgeous, like haunting presence on screen. I mean, just ridiculous how beautiful she is. She actually plays one of her more interesting characters in this movie, I think, or maybe not interesting, but rather very sympathetic and proactive. Because for one thing, yeah, like I mentioned at when I was talking about the synopsis, she is a survivor of a cult, a like group sex cult that apparently she was really creeped out by. She was able to escape from. So it's kind of like just this interesting little quirk going on. She kind of takes the lead on the actual mystery solving, the amateur detective aspect of Giallo's towards the end of the movie, which is really cool to see. She often doesn't really get that chance in the movies that she's in. Like I said at the top of this video, this is a representative Giallo. This is exactly what a typical Giallo is. Black glove killer. Okay, the gloves are just a little bit tan, rather. But a gloved killer who also looks a lot like the killer in Blood and Black Lace, which a lot of people kind of consider not exactly the first Giallo, but the first Giallo to really set the template for exactly what these movies are. And while that character has an all-white face mask, this one is an all-black face mask, but still, it's a very similar look, a very classic look for exactly what you want to see in a Giallo film. When it comes to the kill sequences, they're good. There's a variety to them. It's not just stab, stab, stab. And the first one actually takes place in an elevator and reminds me a lot of the iconic kill scene that Brian De Palma did in Dressed to Kill. And that movie is really like his homage to the Giallo genre. And I wonder if he got that exact kill from The Case of the Bloody Iris. I'd say he probably does. So we've got good kill scenes.
To really like horror tales, you have to be nuts. Shouldn't buy horror tales, if you ask me. She got something loose up here.
As far as the sexuality aspect, you got a lot in this movie, a lot of nudity, as Giallos typically do. This is definitely one of those films that's going to give you that.
Those two are really going at it. Don't be surprised if instead of a corpse, we get a birth on our hands.
There's even this wild scene in this private club where men watch a show from this one model, and basically a volunteer has to come up and try to dominate her, and she fights them off, and apparently she fights them off successfully every single time. You're just going to see really weird stuff like that in Giallo films, the kind of stuff you're not going to see in American movies, and that's part of the appeal of these movies, I guess. Now, I'm praising this movie a lot, but what are the negatives with this film? Well, look, like I said, when it comes to Giallo, either it's boring or it's good. And for me, The Case of the Bloody Iris is good. I don't really watch Giallos judging things too much, like acting and the screenplay and such. But I do think this movie is good on those aspects. But as far as negatives, you can take the first thing that I said about this movie is a representative Giallo and kind of flip that and say this movie doesn't really do anything different. Doesn't do anything particularly interesting that's really going to shock you or anything like that. I do think the killer reveal is solid. It's not super obvious, and you do get that psychosexual motive that a lot of Giallos have that really they took influence from Psycho for. So you do get that, but yeah, you could say it's just a typical Giallo. It's not unique. It's not different. It is 1972, so I want to point out it is an early example before anybody judges it for that too harshly. But so I don't consider that a criticism. I suppose you might. But one thing you might criticize this movie for is it's not one of the most stylish and visually striking Giallos you're ever going to see. It does have its share of some stylish shots. For instance, what the original poster art shows is a pretty cool shot in this that I can't really show you here on YouTube because of, well, I'm sure you can imagine why. But it's not like the Argento movies. It's not near as stylish as the Argento films. It's not going to be near as colorful as a lot of other Giallos that you're going to see. This is a much more normal, standard-looking early 70s movie. Now, does that mean the movie looks bad? Absolutely not. I love movies from this era. I love the way Italian films look from this era. So I'm happy watching this movie, but it's not one of the most stylish Giallos. But I think it's fun. I think it's got a great light tone. I think it moves at a good pace. It's got its intense sequences, it's got some humor, it's got romance, it's got absolutely beautiful actors. Haven't even really mentioned George Hilton, but he's good in this. He's always good in these movies. Just as Edwige Fenech is an impossibly good-looking woman, George Hilton is a ridiculously good-looking dude. So there's something for everybody in the case of The Bloody Iris. Very fun Giallo. This release from Celluloid Dreams also comes with this really cool collection of art cards. This is a boutique label that is coming out swinging with a really cool release. There's only one art card I took out because it's a little too explicit for you kids. I also really liked how when like the FBI warning and the commentaries on this disc do not necessarily reflect our views, the normal stuff that comes up on a Blu-ray, it's made to look like a beat up film print, and I've just never seen a boutique label stylize that part of a Blu-ray or 4K release. It's got a whole bunch of interviews on there. It's got a commentary. This is a very good release of a very fun movie. I recommend it. That's my thoughts on the case of The Bloody Iris, but what do you think about this movie? Let me know down in the comments below. Or are you interested in checking this movie out? If you enjoyed this, check out this recent video where I talk about all of the movies that I watched over the past month, as well as this playlist right down here of a bunch of other vintage horror reviews I've done. Thank you so much for watching. With all that said, don't forget to enjoy yourself today, have some fun, and I'll see you next time.